वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतथा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरणनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशार्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधना बोधितम् लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमला प्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः।
Great timing. Shri Rama. Okay. Great. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Dugdham Gitamritam Mahat. Milk of the Gita, culled from various Upanishadic cows And milk, of course, is a complete food. That's why it is milk. And you can subsist on it. It has everything. And so too, the Upanishad has everything, right? It has everything you need to know. Because the Gita, which is the milk, which is culled from the Upanishads in the form of the cows, talks about that knowledge, knowing which everything is as it were known, and that which it is exemplified by milk is that substance, drinking which one can still survive. It's almost like you don't need anything else, so it's complete. So that's why the whole idea of the milk is given here. Very nice verse. Further, the next one has to do with the praise of Lord Krishna, not as Krishna in the Mahabharata, but as Bhagavan. Even though it begins with a history, Vasudeva Sutam, son of Vasudeva. Who is what? Devam. Yeah, who is Bhagavan? Jyotanatmakatvat. Because of knowing himself without a trace of ignorance, self-knowledge is there, being Bhagavan, as that self-effulgent entity, the cause of the universe. And who is this cause of the universe? Mardanaha. Mardanaha means the destroyer, the killer of many fellows, but two are mentioned here. Kamsa and Chanura. Interesting choice. Kamsa was uncle, Mamaji, was uncle of Krishna, who was jealous of his own nephew even before he was born. Why? Because he was a tyrant and a crook, a crooked man. And it was prophesied that his nephew would come to restore, in the form of Bhagavan, his nephew would be born to restore dharma in the universe and off people like him who were making everyone cry for mercy. And he was jealous of him even before he was born, and he tried to kill him also. It was prophesied that the 8th child of Devaki would come and, kill him. So for good measure, he decided to bash all the other children too, so that in case the prophecy is wrong, maybe it's the 4th child, maybe it's the 3rd child. All the children were killed. How did he know? Because he locked them up. He locked the parents up in a dungeon in Mathura, which is a town. And if you go to Mathura, if you get off the station, in India even today, they will say, "You want to see Krishna's dungeon? Come with me." And there are many dungeons. You don't know which is the real one. But you go just for fun. And they take you to this dungeon, they show you this is where he was handcuffed, the father, Vasudeva, was handcuffed here, and this is what happened, and here he was born. Each one has their own dungeon and their own story. So like this, when the 8th child, how did he know? Because the child cries when it's born. So immediately he would send, or he himself would come and bash the head of the child and kill it. But then when Krishna was born, he had a heart defect, which is why he's blue. Some valve was not there. And he was a very quiet child, did not cry. And all magical things happened. The shackles immediately left, And the Yamuna river was in spate, but then she made way. These snakes in the tradition are very obliging. One of them converted itself into a churning rod, and another one, made itself an umbrella over the basket the father was carrying to leave him in the next town across the river, so that he would be raised by cowherds incognito so that he would survive. And a stillborn child from there was brought, to take his place. And so like this, everything just was a miracle. And of course, Krishna grows up to fulfill the prophecy and kill this dictator, this terrorist called Kamsa. And Kamsa stands for, ego. This is all metaphorical. Kamsa stands for that kind of an ego which is crossed all bounds, all boundaries, where the ends justify the means, and where the power hunger is no longer garden variety power hunger, so that I'm acknowledged and I'm praised and I have a few people who follow me on Facebook. Not that kind of power hunger. This has become power hunger, and it has the look of desire for world domination. This is what all the dictators are made up of, at any cost. So this is that ego which has gone, awry with its own desire to glorify itself or to be glorified. So it will seek to stop at nothing, including killing its loved ones just to get what it wants. Kamsa stands for ego. Chanura was some cousin or somebody of Kamsa. I forget how they were related. If you start looking into the Purana, everyone is related. So I just keep track of the main things. So what is the main thing about Chanura? He was a wrestler. Yeah. And he challenged Krishna. Kamsa hired him. Said, save me the job of killing this fellow, this lad. Everybody loves him. Why should I get a bad name? If I can dominate the world without getting a bad name, it's better for me. So do something. Chanura said, yes, I'll do something. So Chanura went to Krishna. Chanura was 500 pounds. Huge. He didn't have to wrestle. He just had to sit upon his opponent, finished. Bones would be powder. And Chanura said to Krishna, why don't you come and wrestle with me? And Krishna was very diplomatic. He said, look, me, a small boy, a lad of 10 or 12, how can I wrestle with you? You are so huge. Find someone your own size. At least find someone in the 300-pound range. Even wrestlers, they are matched up. I have this, 90-pound 12-year-old. And Chanura said, ha ha ha, don't think I have not been following your Facebook updates. I have been reading all the tweets about you. And I know that you killed Kaliya. Kaliya was another not very obliging snake. And Krishna dances on his head, and he was, killing all the babies in the neighborhood and killing everyone. This snake, making a nuisance of himself. And Krishna, when he was 6, had killed Kaliya, who was, 120 times bigger than him. So Chanura said, I know what you have done. I've read all the social media, and I keep myself abreast of your activities. Don't give me all that innocent talk about I'm a small, what is that, toe-sucking, toe-sucking, butter-stealing baby. You're not, I know that deep down you're very strong. So Krishna cannot say no. And then, but how to defeat him? This fellow is huge. So Krishna gets into the ring. and makes him run around. He just runs, you know. And this demon says, "Stop! I'm getting out of breath." Not very much in shape. He was just using brute force. So he makes him run in the ring, and when and this fellow is getting dizzy running around in that small enclosed wrestling ring. And then when he least expects it, Krishna stops. And then the demon pummels him in the chest, and nothing happens to Krishna because he's Bhagavan. And then what he does is that is how I suppose karate was discovered in this story. He takes him by the little finger and flips him using his own weight. This is what martial arts is. You use both the strength and the weakness of the opponent is used against them. You don't have to, you don't even have to dust your hands off because nothing has happened to you. And so the demon falls and is hurt by his own weight and then dies. This is the thing. And so this Chanura, some cousin or cousin brother, I suppose, of Kamsa, stands for ignorance. Kamsa Chanura Mardanam, the killer of what? Ignorance and ego. Ignorance agrahanam, ego anyatha grahanam. Ego is a spin-off of ignorance. Ego means I take myself to be what I'm not, and I refuse to take myself to be what I am shown to be. This is ego. That's why I hold on to small things, as we were talking about in the morning. All the small things become appealing because that's all they have. And the ego refuses to be peeled from the small things because it holds on to them with a vice grip. And why is this happening? It's happening because of the ignorance. That's why it's interesting that in the chronologically, he kills Chanura first and then Kamsa. So you see, this is a very beautiful allegory. And that's why here in the Gita Dhyana Shloka, even though he killed Kaliya, I've lost track of the number of demons he killed. All these asuras. But these two are mentioned because of their relevance for our study. So the killer of the ignorance called Chanura. Ignorance is like Chanura, 500 tons. Huge, dead weight. Correct? And what happens is that Krishna makes it run around in circles in the sense that it has nowhere to go. When shown the light, it has nowhere to go. This ignorance is cornered from all sides and drops. Like Chanura dropped, the ignorance also drops. In the light, in the mere presence of Krishna, it flips and drops the ignorance in the form of Chanura. That's why even though I feel burdened by ignorance, it's casting a heavy pall and I feel, when is it going to go? It's just running around. And what is making it run around before it falls is that self-shining Atma in the form of Bhagavan Krishna. The teaching is making it run around like a cat on a hot tin roof. It's going to tire itself out. It's just running in place. And then it's just going to die, it's going to drop. And when the ignorance drops, can the ego be far behind? No, that also has to drop because the ego is a spin-off of ignorance. And so, for our purposes, these two demons, what they symbolize is very important. And why is ignorance a demon? Because it has demonic tendencies. A demon is very forceful. This ignorance is very forceful. A demon has no dharma. Ignorance also, is very easy to part ways with dharma when one is ignorant of oneself. And ignorance creates havoc in so many ways. It brings on desire, it brings on action, it brings on result of action. It's endless. so too this, so too like Chanura, it creates havoc in so many ways. And then Kamsa, the ego. Nobody is like me. I have to have this. I know everything. There's nothing more for me to know. These are all, spin-offs of ignorance. And with the ignorance gone, all these things are gone. So Krishna teaches in the unique way by crushing ignorance and its broods, the ego, etc. So Vasudeva Sutam Devam. So first, even though it has a chronological history, just to show that he was born on earth, although not of the earth, quickly the other part of him is invoked, the killer, the teacher, who is the killer of the miscreants in the form of ignorance and the ego, and who is the delight of his mother Devaki. Devaki Paramanandam. She lights up even if you say Krishna once in her presence. So the delight of the mother and the father, the killer of the ego and the ignorance, Tam Krishnam Aham Vande. I salute, I worship this Krishna, because of whom the Bhagavad Gita has come to be, because of whom my inner Chanura and Kamsa are going to be vanquished. I adore him, I worship him. Who is he? Jagat Guruhu. Tam Vande Jagat Gurum. You can't just call yourself a Jagat Guru. Yeah. Jagat Guru means what? World Guru, who can call? Here we are talking about, people, egotistical tyrants for world domination. So if you call yourself World Guru, this is a spin-off of that desire for world domination. Yeah. How can you be Jagat Guru? How can anyone be Jagat Guru? The only way is if what you have to teach is universally sought and is appealing to the entire universe. In that sense, you are Jagat Guru. And what does Krishna teach? How to play flute. No? How to have head ornaments and balance the peacock feather. How to always look nice in yellow. Is that what he is teaching? No. He is teaching about how to lose insecurity, how to lose the sense of powerlessness, how to never feel disempowered, how to know that I am everything that I seek, how to not have self-judgment, self-criticism. That is what he is teaching. How many people have insecurity in the whole world? Huh? Yeah, as many people. Huh?
I heard preponderance without my
Yeah. So, billions, everybody has insecurity. Who is not insecure? Those people are too secure to answer no. They are in some cave somewhere or sleeping happily. So, who is not having self-judgment? Who is not having a sense of lack or wanting centered on the self? Who is not having self-loath? Who is not having self-disempowerment? Who is not second-guessing themselves? This unique human problem is a universal problem that I don't find myself acceptable. Self-non-acceptance is not a historical problem that it was there in the Stone Age. People, we are not reading history books like this. People had self-non-acceptance. Oh, those Philistines, they had those ignoramuses, we can call them that. They had self-non-acceptance, not us. No? Neither is it some culture there. So the anthropologists go to that culture and say, oh, these tribes, in this remote island suffer from self non-acceptance. In fact, the apologist is insecure. That's why he goes off. Instead of sitting at home, he goes off to other tribes. That's inner colonialist. He wants there to just colonize everyone. Study someone. Feel better by writing a book. Of the remoter, the better. Somewhere far away it should be, where no person can land. Now, of course, helicopters go everywhere, Facebook is everywhere, so now it is lost its novelty. Otherwise, in the 60s and 70s, oh my God, you go to some tribe and you study the tribe as though they are animals. You look at them, they have the strange custom of this, of that, and they have the strange pattern of self-judgment. Everybody has self-judgment. It's not confined to a time in history. It's not confined to a particular place or a particular culture. It is there at all times, all places, everywhere. In fact, self-judgment proliferates the entire Jagat. And therefore, the Guru who removes self-judgment is Jagat Guru. That's why Jagat Guru. Krishnam Vande Jagat Guru. Now the next one is very interesting. Describes the battlefield in the form of a kind of a, what is that, pastoral allegory of the river. So when you look at the river life, what all is there in the river life? Huh? River means what is there?
Water.
Water, yeah, definitely. Water is there. Basic, let's just go very basic. Water is there. So river means it should have two banks, yes. Right? Can we bank on that? Yes? Yeah. So here, this river is called Rana Nadi. Rana means battle, Nadi means river. In fact, they say that there was such a river, it has dried out. It is there, it was there flowing in Kurukshetra. It was actually called Rana Nadi, and you had to cross it over to get to the battle spot, the battlefield. But we don't know that. We only know it through the Mahabharata. But then it could also be metaphorical now that it has dried up. Or if it's just a Mahabharata tale, if it was never there, it can be taken metaphorically. The river of battle, the war river, what does it look like? It's a very inimical and hostile atmosphere in this river. Bhishma Drona Tata. It has two banks. What are the two banks? Bhishma is one side and Drona is the other. This is all the other side. We are only talking of the Kauravas, the adharmic people who are at war. So Bhishma and Drona are the two banks, meaning that they have crafted this entire war and they are the placeholders. Bhishma, who was extremely intelligent in other ways, but extremely stubborn. So stubborn that his stubbornness overcame dharma. He's an archetype, a fine fellow, very a great worshipper of Lord Vishnu, and a great person, very self-sacrificing, but misguided. He made some stupid vows. That is why he is called Bhishma. And he had made a vow that he would always support the ruling king of Hastinapura, which is the kingdom, at the center of this battle. No matter who sat on the throne, I will protect. And who is sitting on the throne? Duryodhana. Yes, usurper is sitting on the throne, another tyrant. You know, perhaps a distant relative of Kamsa and Chanura sitting on the throne. And that's why Bhishma, who is extremely dharmic, went on the other side because of this stupid vow. He's an archetype of inflexibility. Yeah. What happens when you don't bend? You break. That's what happens. And you make others break. So this Bhishma is on one of the banks of the river being an elder, and another misguided elder. Who is he? Drona. Who is Drona? He is a teacher of archery. In fact, he shouldn't have been the teacher of archery. He should have been the teacher of the Vedas. That was his Swadharma. But he wanted a lateral move because it was more lucrative. Because when you teach the Veda, you don't charge anything. You just live off what you get. But archery, he could charge, I suppose. So, he was a Brahmana. He was supposed to teach the Veda, but he taught archery instead. He is the archetype of what happens when you are confused about Swadharma. Just look at it as an archetype. Swayam confused, Anyan confusayanti. Such people. Confuse plus niche, causal. So, see, so, mixed up fellow. And he too could have been the voice of reason. He had seen all these princes from a young age. He could have been the voice of Dharma, but his own voice of Dharma was lost. Because he had played hanky-panky with his own Dharma. And he was not able to be the voice. So the silent banks that give a shape to this bloody river are elders who should have talked and yet chose to be silent. They are the sad banks of the rivers, this river of war. Which the war took place. The river was able to flow. If the river represents the war, it took place because nobody could bank on the wisdom of these two banks. Very sad. Then we need the water. Jayadratha, another ally of Duryodhana, big king, huge army. He supplied the water. He supplied the manpower, the fodder for war. And part of the fauna of this river was the hyacinths that bloom, water hyacinths. And from far they look very pretty, these water hyacinths. But if you just underestimate the power of these fragrant water hyacinths, looking nice and blue, purple, and then, they are so nice, and you swim towards them, they have these weeds and these roots. They entangle you, bring you down, or won't let you swim out. They make movement in the water extremely difficult. So the water hyacinth is Gandhara, who is the crafty, crooked, cunning con man by the name of Shakuni, uncle of Duryodhana and his 100 brothers and sister. Crooked fellow. He was the one that loads the dice so that they are bound to lose. There is no dharma here. And in fact, that's what they say that he dreamt about. How to, mark the cards, how to load the dice, how to, weight it in such a way. Those were the stuff of which his dreams were made of. Why? Because that's all he thought of. What you think of when you're awake is what comes. If you think of gulab jamun, that's what you're going to, that's what you're going to dream about. If you think of how to con other people, that's what his dreams were all about, how to con people. And this is Shakuni, and he was extremely good looking, young, and very pleasing, like the water hyacinth. When you look at it, I want it, let me go, and then before you know it, you are embroiled in the roots and the stems of it. The water hyacinth, Gandhara, Neelotpala, even though it says lotus, we have to understand it as a lotus or lily. We have to understand it more as a water hyacinth. So this blue, out of the blue he came and destroyed the lives of the Pandavas. So he is the water hyacinth of distraction and deception. Shalya. Who is Shalya? No, that's Jayadratha. We already discussed. He's the big fellow with all the aplomb and the manpower. Shalya is the charioteer of Karna. Very, very erudite fellow and very dharmic also. But unfortunately, as a charioteer, he could not influence him, even though he said this is wrong. So in other words, he was doing, even though he didn't believe in the war, he was doing the bidding of someone who was fighting on the side of adharma. So, Shalya is the shark, Grahavati. Kripa, another king who was obliged to Duryodhana, obligated rather. Vahani means the Vega of the river is called Vahani. Vega means what? The speed, the flow, the quickness of the speed. Kripa, deceptively quick. Velakula, Karna. Karna is the tempestuous breakers, the waves in this river. Because Karna was always an angry, young, restless and angry man. Huge issues with abandonment. When Kunti, his mother, was a young girl, an extremely angry sage came to live with them. And this sage's name was the one who is difficult to live with. Who was that? Durvasa. Difficult to live with. His name itself was that, difficult to get along. Hello, what's your name? Nice to meet you, I am difficult to get along. That's what his name was. But he had a lot of siddhis. And you don't want to tick off someone who has siddhis, because those siddhis become what?
Well, ticked off, curses.
Curses. They become curses directed against you, and then they say, well, once a curse is given, it cannot be taken back. Flimsy excuse, but nonetheless, that's what they all say. But even this Durvasa, who was cursing people left, right and center, he even put a curse on Indra. Indra, who was one of the few celestials who thought he was kind of permanent in his Aindric abode, was cursed by Durvasa to be impermanent. This is what it is. Because Durvasa was feeling magnanimous. He had a garland on him. And Durvasa was just going, he was just in Brahman and ecstatic. Perhaps he was singing Samaveda. How, how, how. And in that ecstasy, he took the garland off his neck and threw it. Indra was taking a ride on Airavata. And Indra caught it playfully, received it happily, and put it on the elephant's neck. The elephant hated the garland. It was strung of celestial flowers, and it irritated the poor thing and it went mad. So the elephant plucked the garland from it using its own trunk, threw it on the ground and for good measure stamped on it. Durvasa took it personally. And Durvasa said, "How dare you disregard the present I gave you? This is my garland, my present, and your elephant." Not only threw it on the ground, but stamped on it for, just to make sure that it was totally destroyed. You dissed my present, I'm going to diss you. And so saying, he said the magic words, "May you be, dethroned." So like this, Durvasa is not an ordinary sage. Of course, all the children ask, how come he's a sage if he's so angry? Jamadagni, another anger one. His name was the fiery one. Durvasa, difficult to live with. All these things. And but Durvasa, even though he was very angry, has the distinction of being kind and giving blessings to people, not just curses. Kunti was a very patient woman, and as a young girl was sent to give him food. She had to cook for him every day. And oh my God, he was the pickiest eater that you could ever imagine. Anything she made he would not like. Anything. And not only that, he would get hungry at 2 o'clock, odd hours in the night. 2 o'clock in the night, he would say, "Bring me food." And she had to wake up, take a bath, and cook for him. And she did this uncomplainingly for many years before she was married. And he was very pleased, and he said that, "I'm giving you a secret mantra from the Atharva Veda. And that if you just think of any Devata and wonder what it is like to have a child with that, you will immediately have a child." Yeah, these days they do this on the computer, What would it be like? I saw somewhere, somebody sent me this. I don't know how. People have a lot of time on their hands. They said that, this person said, "I'm really depressed." I said, "Why?" "Because I just paired myself with a celebrity on the computer and it told me what the offspring would look like." I said, "What?" And so they explained, this is how I know. So apparently they have the faces of celebrities, maybe celebrity means what? Actors? Actresses? Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. So some celebrities, and then, you have your own mugshot, and then the celebrity's mugshot, and then the computer creates a child of these two people. What would it look like? It's some kind of a joke, I suppose. And sometimes people have fun and they put a dog or a cat to see what comes out, because this is what the computer does. But this knowledge has come from the Mahabharata, because Kunti had that boon. And she could wait to get married to try it out, but no proposals were coming. So she was only 16. She was not yet married. But she was like, "Oh, does the mantra work?" Because the sage went away happily for a change. Because she didn't complain, she didn't tick him off in any way. Acceded to all his demands. And, whatever it was, she did it. And so therefore he blessed her. And so one day she woke up in the morning, the baby rays of the sun were shining in the windows of her room. And she opened the balcony to go into the balcony and welcome the sun. And she just wondered, I wonder what it will be like to recite this mantra looking at the sun. And immediately and literally she was with child. A very cute fellow. And since it was the blessing of the sun, he looked radiant. resplendent baby. And on top of that, he had started to cry, and she was like, "Shh, keep quiet. How am I going to explain you? I can't show you to society. I can't take you out of this balcony, let alone into the room." So she goes via the balcony. Her room is overlooking a little creek. And she swaddles the baby in this royal fabric that she has. She's a princess. Adopted daughter of Kunti Bhoja. And she swaddles him and seems to have some skill in carpentry, makes a makeshift raft and sets him sail downstream. She says, "Now you can bellow your lungs out, no problem, go." She says a silent prayer. "May you not perish. May you be adopted by worthy people who take care of you." And her prayer is answered because it's come from a good heart. And then she vows never to misuse this secret mantras, at least until she's married, so that she doesn't get into these kinds of situations. Again, meanwhile the baby floats downstream into the lair of these chariot repairers. These people working class people who repair chariots of the rich for a living. Poor people who just do work with their hands. And the wife of the charioteer by the name of Radha comes to give him his lunch, because they're all working there by the river bank. They're childless, she and her husband. And she says, "Oh my God, is that a baby coming down?" And she quickly goes and rescues this howling infant, grasps her to him and says, "This is Bhagavan who has given this beautiful looking child for me." And quickly runs to her husband and says, "Look at what we found. You can take the rest of the day off. Let us just feel so happy with him." And they name him Karna, because the gift of the sun is these two beautiful earrings in the shape of the sun, the mark of his identity. And Karna cannot get over when he was a child. He doesn't fit in that street children kind of playing thing, because he's a misfit. He has the mannerisms of a prince. He's OCD, will not eat where it's dirty, and very much, the princess and the pea, those kinds of qualities. He's not accepted here. He doesn't feel accepted. They all have a hearty laugh because they eat everything off the floor. "Come on, Karna, no, this is, I don't do such things." Then he thinks, maybe this is not where I belong. And then he goes, teaches himself archery, goes, and then even attends the graduation, thinking that will buy him a place, because that's where he feels at home, with all the courtly, princely people. They are shooting off arrows, and they seem to have, even though his clothes are not quite come up to par, they are homemade by Radha, but but he feels he belongs in their ranks. He looks longingly at those gorgeous silks, dhotis they wear, and their angavastrams. He just cannot get enough of them. He just says, that's who I am. How come I'm here? Every child wonders if it's adopted, at some age. There is a mistake. How can these people be my parents? Maybe I'm adopted, or maybe I got exchanged at the hospital. This is every child's fantasy when it learns that, these parents, I don't know where they have come from. They are nothing like me. And sometimes the parents also wonder, did we give birth to this fellow? But that's just garden variety, just a momentary wonder, maybe lasting in a few years in adolescence. But this Karna kept wondering because nothing matched. And he was always drawn to all this princely, courtly class of people. And then he learns to be a very good archer. And yet he is disbarred from the graduation ceremony. He goes there saying, hey, I need a certificate, I have passed with honors. I can shoot as well as Arjuna does. I can do all this. They say, no, you come from a different class. You don't belong here. Go home. And there is no archery contest for people in his class. Maybe there is a chariot repairing contest, but he's not keen on that. He doesn't want to repair chariots. He wants to ride them. And he grows up with a sense of deep neglect and abandonment. And when he understands that he is the cast-off child of Kunti, that but for this historical accident of her setting him adrift in this river, he would have been enjoying the royal victuals in the palace grounds, being pampered and having the best of teachers for Panini, having the best of teachers from Panini to archery, having everyone. And he would be wearing those silken dhotis, and he would be having, the accolades when he went to a bazaar and when he walked on the street, everybody would be saying, Jai Ho, long live the Kuru princes, they would be chanting. And here he has lost all that, and everybody makes fun of him. So he has this big grudge to bear, which Duryodhana exploits in the war. So the reason I talked about the graduation ceremony, the valedictory ceremony to which he was not privy to enter, Duryodhana puts a hand on his shoulder, befriends him right then and there outside the hall to where he was not given entry, and says, don't worry, I have a village there, a principality, and I need a chief. I'm going to appoint you chief. And for someone who's chafing about not having things, it's very easy to obligate them by giving them just a few crumbs. And Duryodhana had him under the spell. And he could not feel but grateful to Duryodhana. Even though Duryodhana was in the wrong, he supports him in the war. So he is this tempestuous breaker in the battle river, in the river of war. Then we have two other youngsters, Ashwathama and Vikarna. Vikarna is the youngest brother of Duryodhana. And Ashwathama is the son of Drona. They are the alligators, the snapping alligators. Yes. Hiding in the water. Young, energetic, and they lash out when least expected. And who is Duryodhana finally? Avartini. Avartini is a hidden, what is it called? Whirlpool, eddy, some kind of a thing. Not eddy, baddie. And a hidden whirlpool, which you don't see on the surface. It's got another name. Undercurrent. Something like that. It's something like that. It's got another name. And this hidden whirlpool. On the surface you're swimming, nothing happens. You go a few feet under, you're sucked in. And Duryodhana knew how to suck people in. This is what he did for a living. He exploited and manipulated people's psychology. He drummed and played on everyone's weaknesses. He was a master controller of the human mind. And he knew what to do. So what would he do? He would quickly make someone be obligated. That's what he did to Jayadratha, Kripa, all the people. Karna, of course. Give them favors. Make them feel really good. He was a great at hospitality. He would lay the whole earth before you and make you feel so good that you would end up supporting him. You would lose your, rationale. So he was very good at manipulating the people who were weak in dharma, whose dharmic muscles were little weak. They hadn't done enough push-ups and pull-ups. So he would choose these people who were on the precipice of dharma, could go either way. They were not very mentally and spiritually strong. They were vulnerable. He would choose people with this kind of a shady, vulnerable past, like Karna, and exploit them, exploit their vulnerability, so that all the people who fought for him out of a sense of obligation, out of a sense of choicelessness. Even when they realized they couldn't do this, they were just so deep into it. Because especially ours is a culture of dharma, like once you give the word, you have to do it. So here they were battling with themselves. They did not want to side him, but they ended up siding him. This is such a river, would you feel like crossing? Water, something is there ready to grab your leg before you can swim a lap. How are you going to cross? First you have these big sharks, Shalya, etc. Then you have the speed of the water, Kripa, etc. Then the two banks are itself hostile banks. They're not welcoming banks. This bank is pushing you and that bank is not asking you to come to the shore. That bank will keep you adrift in the river. So both the banks are hostile. And the sharks and the alligators and the snapping turtles, if there are the small foot soldiers, etc., all these small players, and the master schemer in the form of the water hyacinth type Shakuni, all these people with the undercurrent, called who? Duryodhana. Who will feel like crossing this river? If you look at the river, you feel sad. You feel hopeless. But yet, the Dhyana Shloka says, Sa Rananadi Uttirna, from through to cross, Tirna, crossed over. Pandavaihi Rananadi Sa Uttirna. Uttirna abhavat. How was this she crossed? Because they had an adept boatman. Kaivartakaha is boatman, a ferry man, who ferried them across in his personal boat of knowledge, in his nauka of knowledge nauka, which never leaks and which has the strength to withstand these snapping crocodiles and these encircling sharks. Because Keshava is the boat. Bhagavan is the ferry man. He is the one who ferries you across samsara. The teaching is the boat. And the teacher here, being Bhagavan, Lord Krishna, is the boatman. And because of this grace of this wonderful boat of knowledge, which is impervious to the din of samsara, this boat of knowledge, which is impregnable by any kind of drilling instruments in samsara, neither the teeth of the crocodile nor the snapping of the turtles and the sharks, they cannot take a bite of this boat. They cannot make a dent in this boat. If they try to bite the boat, they become toothless. Yeah, their teeth get stuck in the boat and they have to leave their dentures and go. Swim away in despair and become vegetarian afterwards because they cannot hunt. They live on seaweed, organic seaweed, river weed for the rest of their river reeds for the rest of their life because they have nothing to chew, nothing to bite, nothing to catch, nobody to snap at. This is what happens when the boat of knowledge encounters samsara. What loses? Samsara stands to lose. Because that boat is so strong. And the boat of knowledge will not take you, that's not enough. It has to have an oarsman in the form of the teacher who negotiates around these wily undercurrents and crocodiles and hyacinth reeds. An adept teacher is needed. The boat is, of course, the Gita. But without the teacher, the Gita is a paper boat. Yeah. It's just the matter. But the matter has to be handled properly. And that knowledge, handled properly, makes it an impregnable boat and makes it a boat that definitely reaches its destination. In fact, that is the real boat of knowledge, which makes both the banks and the river disappear. And appropriately enough, the Rananadi has disappeared because it signifies samsara. Sa khalu, indeed, uttirna Rananadi, kaihi pandavaihi. Why? Very easily it says, Kaivartakaha Keshavaha. Tasmat. Because of that. Because of the fact that Bhagavan Krishna was the boatman. The boat itself was the knowledge of the Upanishads. The material for the boat is the knowledge of the Upanishads. The handling of the pramana, the means of knowledge, was the oars, which guided it across so nicely, in such a way that there was really no river to speak of. The sharks became extinct, sharks of doubt and despair. And then any kind of feelings of neglect, by the akula, the restless waves signified by Karna, also just subsided. Everything subsided. All there was knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. Boatman, the Krishna disappeared as you. And then the Gita became one with you. Everything was just, all was just one. And so too long ago, these people crossed. Such a horrific river they crossed with such ease, such beautiful ease, because they were guided by Bhagavan as the teacher. Now too we are at a important turn. And what is that turn? Kali Yuga is the turn. And at this juncture, we also have the same problem. The river of samsara, this bank capitalism, that bank greed, and then in between, waves of agony, strife, corporate, undercurrents of corporate greed, usurping, encroachment, terrorism. This is also a Rananadi. Plus what to talk of the internal Rananadi of doubts, fears, sorrows lurking. All that. Just as the Pandavas were crossed to safety because Krishna was with them, so too we also, sitting here right now, 5,000 and odd years after the Gita was composed, we will also be ushered out of samsara thanks to this very man in the form of Bhagavan and thanks to the boat of knowledge called the Bhagavad Gita. That's the promise. Otherwise, why to read of someone else's rescue? What is it going to do to me? Yeah, so big deal. 5,000 years ago they crossed over. So what? This is why it's pertinent now. And appropriately, the next verse is going to talk about Kali Yuga, which we have to wait to see till tomorrow. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.